Brian Brackeen didn't know he was an entrepreneur until later in life. He was adopted at an early age by loving parents who supported his decision to drop out of college, to leave a big job at Apple, and to eventually start his own companies, Kairos. Brian founded Kairos in 2012. His leadership had Kairos selected by the Wall Street Journal as one of the top 25 startups in the country in 2013. Growth and innovation within the company and in the face and emotion recognition space continued until he was forced out of the company in 2018. Brian then went on to launch Lightship Capital, the Cincinnati-based venture capital fund that works to support the underrepresented, at an early stage, transformational businesses, etc. Brian is responsible for fund operations, entrepreneurial training, and leadership at the AI team. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian is here with us today for a conversation with Juan Pablo Cappello, founder, president of PAG.law, sponsors of this podcast, Aqui Ahora. Welcome to both, and welcome to all of you.
Brian, thanks so much for joining.
Good for being here.
Great, man. I was so happy to get a chance to talk with you, especially with everything that's going on in the world and in the streets. It's interesting. I think in Miami, oddly enough, and I lived in New York for a long time, I think we're afraid to have difficult conversations. Mm-hmm. In New York, actually, oddly enough, things for me living in New York for 9 years felt much more integrated. Here in Miami, things are much more segregated, especially amongst minorities. And again, I think there definitely been some things that have happened in Miami, and things that are still happening in Miami that people want to look away from rather than look at. And it sort of reminds me of Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth, that it's a pain in the ass when you realize, it sucks when you realize there's shit going on that you just wish you could wish away and not have to face. But so, yeah, I just really appreciate you, appreciate everything you've done for the tech community here in Miami, now in Ohio and Miami, and the world. And just really was interested to get a chance to talk with you.
Yeah, to jump in before we jump back, I saw a interesting census picture once about Miami, and it showed like the Brickell downtown area of all the races kind of were all
right.
And, so those of us that live in that kind of, bubble, we're seeing great diversity. You're going to the office, the whole nine, right? You're seeing a lot of that. And then as you got further and further away from that kind of urban downtown core,
it was interesting.
Very set, groups, in those particular area, like all black in one area, for their census doesn't really reflect the kind of demography that we know,
right.
Right. So like black is just black, right? But we know there's like a Haitian area, right? There's a Bahamian area, right?
And just same exact thing as you were saying it. It's so interesting because it's like, you sort of know your clique, right? And so like, as you were saying that, I wasn't thinking actually Bahamian, Haitian, whatever. What am I thinking? I'm thinking, Hialeah's, Cuban, Key Biscayne's very Latin, but it's like Spaniards and Argentines, Pinecrest is where the Brazilians have gone, or even up north, you have Coral Springs, which is like, just like being in Brazil. Yeah. So it is interesting. You're right. And the census doesn't capture, but it's actually even more semi-segregated.
Right.
And I guess you're right. I mean, I guess what it is, in New York, obviously you have ethnic neighborhoods, but there's just, and I guess because also in New York, other than than if you're, white or whatever, everyone else is in the minority. And it is a little weird here in Miami that it's a city of 2.8 million. And I've heard statistics that it's 2 0.2 million Hispanics broadly defined. So, and obviously there's some, the Dominicans might, fit in both categories or, right. I mean, there's some cross mixing there, of course. And, Colombia, not every
Colombians and
right. Afro-Colombians and Brazilians, particularly the ones from Rio, et cetera. But it's very interesting. Yeah. How you have that. So, what have you been thinking? What's been going on in your head? Obviously, you launched Lightship Capital. For me, a huge breath of fresh air, looking at the really pathetic and embarrassing numbers in venture capital in terms of, women founders that are being supported, minority founders that are being supported, and Black founders, just at the very, very bottom of those statistics. I mean, 2% are just numbers that are, shameful.
Yeah.
Especially given that, the tech community prides itself as being left-leaning and progressive and, and that's what I mean. It's an inconvenient truth. It's like, it's great to go to Burning Man and talk about, kumbaya and, share a joint with, a Black guy, dressed in African garb or some shit and feel good. But, where's the fucking money going?
Deal. Yeah.
Right. So, what have you been thinking, man? I mean, I just wanted to catch up with you and hear.
It's really about multiple things, but a little bit of the kind of backstory, and we can get back to the Kairos story in a second. But
we're gonna talk about that. I wanted to start. Let's talk about the great shit you're doing now, because I know part of it was informed by your experience in the past. But I really want to start off talking about where you are now, what you're thinking now, and then we'll talk about how you got there, because that's an important story to talk about.
Absolutely. So so for the folks, we'll get to that in a second, but. When I was trying to figure out kind of what I wanted to do next, so to speak, it was probably about 2018. My wife, Candace, who had been investing in women-led and minority-led startups in the Midwest for a few years, said, "Hey."
And had she been doing it through an institutional platform or just on her own, or what was her?
She ran an accelerator.
Okay.
And then they had a micro fund, $5 million kind of deal. And so she said, "Hey, why don't you, while you're thinking about what you're doing, come on up here, mentor some of the companies, kill some time." And, like all brilliant women, it's kind of, she got me, like, it's ended up being my life's work. Right. I didn't realize how much I had learned over the years running Kairos. And how much of that information could be helpful to so many people. And so I said, okay, the accelerator's fun. It's amazing. It's interesting. But how do we have a bigger impact? How do we, you know me for a long time. It's got to be like all the way. It's got to be world-class. It's got to be best in the country, best in the world. Nothing for me is good enough to be best in Miami or just best in Cincinnati or what have you.
Right.
And so we said, okay, let's go out and raise a much larger fund, and let's look at the whole swath of the country that is really also underrepresented. So you've got underrepresented founders being women of color, LGBT, you name it, women in general. But then you also have entire regions of the country, and Miami included in this.
Right.
Where if you're in New York or if you're in San Francisco and you're a woman running a biotech startup in Boston, there still is money available for you, for that company. But if you're really crushing it in Louisville, Kentucky, if you're absolutely just doing a great job in West Palm Beach,
good luck.
It's not the same.
Right.
Same. And then we also have this issue, and I felt this myself, where I would go to Valley investors and they say, "This is really interesting. Are you ready to leave Miami and come to the big leagues over here?" As if any of our customers, like none of our customers were from there. So
right. And what's funny is you were at Apple, right? And then you moved to Miami, right? To get a different vibe, a different energy.
So yeah, I wanted to be the investor that, I didn't have at the institutional level. Right. And so, we are a venture fund that's focused on women and minorities and underrepresented founders in the broad term Midwest. So that was everything from kind of Pittsburgh West, like Nevada but all the way down to like Florida and Texas. So we leave out the kind of upper,
Right.
The Seattle, the San Francisco, the New York, the Boston. You guys are okay. We kind of draw it in a T the other way.
No, I know. I mean, I love that idea of, it's so easy to bitch. And especially now, it's like, you got to stand up and do something. I mean, I remember right as we were getting to know each other, sitting around one night, there was a tech dinner when Dave McClure came through Miami. And I don't know if you were there or not.
I went
at Novecento. And afterwards, I think I was, smoking a joint with Damien and some other people. And people were sort of bitching about what Miami didn't have. Like, it sucks. And, I was like, fuck, if. So I just thought, if people in this room are just going to bitch and not do something, I mean, the city's never going to make any progress. And I just thought about my daughters who were like, I don't know, 12, 10, and 8 at the time. And thinking, shit, I don't want them to come, leave Miami to go to great schools, live in San Francisco, live in New York, have some adventures, come back to Miami, hopefully to, raise a family, and then have to be real estate agents or second tier private bankers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was like, we need to do something. So, and, we did the Lab Miami, we did AGP Miami Angels. We began investing in amazing entrepreneurs like you and Amanda. We just began trying to do stuff and, doing SIME and, some of that stuff stuck. Some of it didn't, we pissed away a lot of money. But a lot of those initiatives are, still going.
Yeah.
But what we didn't do is just sit around and bitch and hope for things to change. And what I like, even years before, this sort of social upheaval we're living through right now, I mean, you identified a problem and you went and created Lightship Capital and, are trying to actually change, not give people an excuse to keep complaining about the same problem for the next 20 years, but actually giving them an opportunity to be part of the solution. And
when you start, you can do good things, right? But starting is important. And this is true for starting. Right.
That's a good point. Right. But one of the first things to change is to start, right? I mean,
yeah,
you just can't get. And so when you started, I mean, you saw you saw this need thanks to your fiance, now your wife, in terms of underrepresented founders, that she was supporting in underrepresented sort of tech communities in the Midwest, et cetera. And then, I know that, as you said, I mean, you're a very ambitious guy. You started Lightship as a relatively small venture fund. And how's that journey? How have you, what kind of support have you gotten? Have you been disappointed? What's that journey been like for you?
Yeah, it's been amazing. And for your listeners, Juan Pablo is one of the best attorneys in town. So, saying what I can't say. I'll share this and he'll edit it if need be.
Yeah. No, don't worry. I know, I understand all the priming the market rule.
He does. But we have had a wildly good reception, even before all the current unrest. And then the unrest has really kind of led to kind of greater success. I'll give you an example. When people start venture funds, particularly when they're the first funds, a lot like startups where you're just like a friends and family kind of round, right? So that first fund, you're going to like the richest friend maybe they can do $500,000, maybe, cobble some things here together. Most first funds are less than $20 million. If you can get to 15, you're doing all right. You use that money, you kind of prove yourself, and then fund 2, even that's not easy, but by fund 3, it really starts to cook a little bit. We've had the opposite situation. So a lot of large institutional folks, entire states, pension funds, large corporations who are focused on the Midwest and South, see the value and have really and kind of embraced what we've been doing and wrote kind of really large checks. And we set out to do a $20 million fund. We'll eventually the exact amount, but we're going to definitely more than double that. And
wow,
it says a lot about people's belief in this community of underrepresented
Right.
founders, but also in the geographies that there's more to come in those places.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting because that book, The World is Flat, was such a giant bestseller 5-6 years ago with sort of the thesis that, hey, the best ideas, thanks to the internet and connectivity, et cetera, the best ideas can sort of come from anywhere, right? It isn't that Silicon. I mean, maybe at the time you sort of had to eventually move to Silicon Valley for the capital, but in terms of the idea, the team, et cetera, it clearly didn't need to be in Silicon Valley. And perhaps, and I think this is part of your thesis, being in the Valley, encourages one kind of thinking. And, so many, for me, the big problem in Silicon Valley is, we thought technology was going to, solve poverty and clean drinking water. And instead we got Instagram filters, right? Or, AI is supposed to be doing these amazing things. And what's actually the number one use case for AI? Your recommendation engine for Netflix, Pandora. And, you know what I mean? It's just like, the next video you're going to get on YouTube. Like, why aren't we harnessing AI to solve some real problems, like social inequality, et cetera?
And people in other areas are solving real problems that are real for them. So
right,
we sea level rise and sustainability work in Miami that you don't see in San Francisco because everybody's worried about Instagram filters. I mean, it's the exact same thing. The other thing that we see is exits are normalized outside of the region. So it's hard to get to the early kind of startup money, but after you get it gets cooking. If you're doing $50 million of revenue, it doesn't matter where you are, you're going to get paid based on the fact you're doing $50 million revenue, period.
Right.
Yeah. And oftentimes the exit partners like Procter & Gamble in Cincinnati are not in Silicon Valley, right? So you just got to get them there. They're going to do really well if you can just get them to be a certain size. And that's where venture, I think, makes a lot of sense.
Well, and the other thing is, venture's become such a game of the giant winners. It's almost like in the public markets, unless a company's doing a $10+ billion IPO, there's no excitement. I mean, even Zoom was like criticized for being a smallish IPO at 9.2 billion with all the headwinds that, this, but again, it's like, whereas the reality is the Procter & Gamble's, the corporates buy companies 25 to 250 million.
That's right.
And so I imagine, a fund like yours, it's getting in early. You'd love to have $1 billion+ exit, but if one of your companies wants to sell at 150 million, that's not a bad result either.
It's one of the reasons we'll never have a fund larger than $100 million because it's so hard to get $1 billion to return $3 billion, $5 billion. It's just there's only so many companies that can do that, and there's so many firms chasing those 5 companies a year. It doesn't even make any sense. But if you're generating a 4 or 5 $200 million exits out of 35, 40, 50 opportunities, that's a realistic math game there. And people don't like to. It's not celebrated to play that game for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me because the reality is venture returns suck. That's like the dirty secret. If anyone who doesn't believe me, just Google it and actually dig into what venture returns actually are. It's something like 3% of funds capture 80+% of the industry returns, and half of VC funds never return invested capital back, the 100% of the invested capital back to their investors after like 7, 8, 9 years.
Yeah.
And why? Because, everyone's trying to get on to the next Facebook, the next Twitter, the next Uber. And that's great if you happen to, but it's like going to Las Vegas and, everyone's, betting on the, 1,000,000-to-1 shot. Yeah, a few people are going to win. Good. And of course, the interesting thing is you look at, the returns 10 years on, and that 3% of funds, which is capturing that is always changing. Yeah. Right. And so, as you say, the funds have amazing returns when they're small. And then now they become multi-billion-dollar funds. And guess what? They're in that class of funds that is underperforming relative to the top tier.
That's right.
Yeah, no, that's why I love your investment thesis. One thing I've been struck by is you're doing a lot of, you're doing a lot of sort of community outreach as well, from what I can tell, like with your switch pitch, et cetera. And I think, my view is you do see some funds, groups like 500 Startups that, do a lot of that sort of community building. But a lot of VC funds, quite honestly, are pretty lazy because, again, they just want to, hey, we're just going to make a couple bets a year that are really going to, matter. So we're just going to sort of network to try to get into the hot deal and hope that goes well. But you seem to really be, trying to, talk to some of these potential founders almost before they, as they're developing their idea. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because I've really been struck by the energy you're putting into that.
Yeah, when you're focused on, like the Sand Hill Road model is, I go to work in the morning, I sit in my office, and a parade of entrepreneurs comes through, and I, every now and then I pick one.
You get to anoint one.
Yeah, exactly. And I just go home and I, do whatever they do after that. That can't.
Well, they're in bed. I mean, their dinner's done at 8:30. I mean, it's the one thing that I'm always struck when I'm out there. It's like, where's the energy? And it's like you're in a restaurant, it's 8:15, and like you realize you're the last people in there and you're probably talking too loud. It's so different than Miami, but that's a separate story.
We don't even go till 9.
Exactly. So, we need some loud music the whole time.
Higher time. So if you're gonna, we're a fund focused on market rate return. We're capitalists. We expect to return capital to our investors. That said, we are a bit mission driven, for these communities, and it's important to outreach to them, right? We want to see more folks that have this opportunity, and sometimes they don't know. A couple interesting examples. One of our latest investments, we're such a big fan, company called Fresh Fry. And you'll appreciate this because in our cultures in Miami, all the cultures we talked about, fry food, right?
Oh, fuck yeah. Oh, heart disease too, but yes.
Every single one.
And not a lot of vegetables. No. I mean, that's the thing. Like, go to a Cuban restaurant and it's like you could have you could have a crappy side salad with some raw onions on it. That's about it. That's it for vegetables.
That's all you're going to get. Right? So all of these groups are frying. Peruvian, it doesn't matter. All of them. So Fresh Fry, we came across a company, young man Jeremiah Chapman, scientist from the University of Louisville. His grandmother, when he was a kid, used to take a potato, and you probably remember this from your family, like take the oil off the stove, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. She would put it in a jar, right?
Yeah.
And save that oil for later, right? Because
that was my great. I mean, what else would you do? What were you supposed to do? You could waste that, and then it went. And then when it got like fried 5 times, it went into the dog's food.
Exactly.
So, and then we were wondering why the dog always had diarrhea. Really?
So this is a cultural competency that Black and brown folks are used to. Some of our white counterparts, they just threw it away, right? And
right.
By the way, rightfully so, for the record.
Right. Yeah, no doctors saying, you know what, drink that.
Yeah. We're not saying that this is right, but in Black and brown communities, we're used to doing that.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. So he became fascinated with this as a kid and grew up and became fascinated with oils and created and patented an organic pod, like a Tide Pod, that you throw in a commercial cooking oil. It sucks all the impurities and all the dirt and all the smoke out of the oil. And then the next morning, the morning staff just throws it out and you're ready to go. It extends the cooking life about 33 to 40%.
Wow.
So saving these big fryers like a Pollo Tropical a ton of money, right? A ton of money.
Right.
So because it's in Louisville, Black founder, impossible for him to kind of get the attention of venture investors. We're going to be one of his first 2 venture investors. But the company, because you don't think anyone's coming, you don't think like the cavalry's coming, you don't think that like this cash is on the way. You've got to make money yourself.
Right.
So they did $500,000 in revenue in their very first month of business. They're at multiple millions of dollars of revenue. This is their first round, right? Which is insane. and they're already in 4,000 restaurants around the country, and they have a Cisco white label contract as well. And this is like at the first round. This is like they haven't done anything,
Right.
you know.
Right. But your point is, is hey, if that had been, forget the color, but if that had been a founder who was in Stanford City, that company would have been valued at an insane valuation, and perhaps the chances of actually success, making money, would be way lower, because it's almost like a young athlete who gets that contract, 100, and they pay him whatever $100 million guaranteed contract. You know how great that athlete has to perform to live up to those massive expectations. Because that's my big point. A lot of times, a lot of companies that fail, once they get into the VC game, they didn't need to fail. The problem was they got too much too fast. And since the investors are pushing them for a 20x return, I know you probably aren't. Not on day one. You want it, but you're not going to say it.
That's right.
But those, and so it's almost like the entrepreneur's forced to make bets he or she might not otherwise want to make, and that can lead to a good company blowing up.
I agree. I totally agree. They just feed it till it dies. When in reality, and I want whatever Jeremiah wants, right? But if a fresh fry sells for $400 million, that is a success.
Oh,
guy in Louisville, Kentucky,
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah. No, it is funny. It's sometimes even with like as you said, most first time funds start at 20 million. I'm like 15. It's a lot of money. I mean, I get there's an issue with the numbers with the 2 and 20. Okay, if you only raise 10 million, you only have 200 grand to pay costs, et cetera. And so the numbers actually don't work. I get it. But on the other hand, it is a lot of money, especially in our communities.
It is.
It
is.
So let's circle back to June 2017, was it?
Yeah, I think so.
I remember it. I definitely remember it, and remember waking up and talking with you and being very upset and discouraged. So, at Kairos, I love you. You were one of, the first companies in Miami that I invested in. I think I was, first money in with a couple friends. Alan Jerry, it was actually his very first venture investment. Marcos Giverti, Alejo Chuela, and a couple of other people.
Love them all.
Yeah, amazing. We're not mentioning the people we don't love.
That's right.
That's just a little inside dig. And, company facial recognition, this huge, issue around fraud in the workplace with people punching in, et cetera. You become an Endeavor entrepreneur, sort of the first generation of Endeavor entrepreneur, huge support of the local community, et cetera. And then you get into the, sort of the venture, that venture funding, sort of treadmill. And at some point you meet a local angel investing group. Yeah.
Their name is, sometimes I call them Voldemort, but it's New World Angels, NWA, which is hilarious. And it's
right. Another cultural for our Latin listeners, I'll have to do a sidebar to explain that cultural reference.
Put a little Wikipedia article on the bottom there.
Yeah, exactly. In the show notes.
So yeah, they even back then, as I recall, as I understand about those guys, I don't think they've ever had a successful exit, as far as I know. It's a group of angels, 50 plus. They've just grown over the years. When I met them, maybe 50 plus, maybe now around 80 or so, that invest in early stage companies.
The oldest angel investing group in South Florida. They've been around apparently from in the late 70s, early 80s. A very, very long history.
Yeah, and I think they've done. I just want to be totally fair. They've done some good deals, and they've helped some people. I think one of the challenges I found with angel groups in general, particularly that one, it's not a particularly diverse group.
Right.
And we're talking about in a community that's very diverse, right?
Right.
Says a lot. And then that lack of diversity, I think, sometimes leads to what we're talking about so much here in the world, right? Like a lack of empathy,
right,
cultural understanding for some of the founders.
And so, I think, what you ended up facing is, what sort of an entrepreneur's worst nightmare. It's something, I'm always trying to, be a bit balanced. You'd run Kairos for quite a number of years. As you said, set expectations very high. We're working towards that. But you got concerned, from what I understand, that as we're seeing in China, facial recognition technology can be used by governments, oppressive governments, et cetera, to oppress minority groups. And I remember actually having a conversation with you when Google Glass, this was its time, year 1 or 2, we were like, one of the first conferences to have the Google Glass. And there was like a 3D art project. I can't remember, but, and I was, and it was like when that expression glass hole was sort of, like, hey, are you going to be a glass hole or whatever? And I said, yeah, what's really exciting about this technology is I'm terrible with names. And so, like facial recognition, the name will pop up and you're like, dude, that's hard. Like as a minority, yeah, you need to, you were like the first person that like, was like, warning, like that's Skynet, like be careful, you might feel white in this city, but I went to college in North Carolina. Like I did not feel white with a name like Juan Pablo in North Carolina. You know what I mean? Like, and you were actually the first person that sort of highlighted that. And from what I understand, and this is where, I think I find it shocking that, no one from the Miami Herald, no one from the Sun Times, as far as I know, ever came to talk to you. No one from the New Tropic has ever came to talk to you about what happened, because I think it's a story we, regardless of, debating the facts, and I'm sure, New World and the investors, have their own story. I think it's a very important story to think about. If nothing else, I think, you're probably being too kind, but if nothing else, because of the lack of empathy there, right? And, the understanding that, when you have, people who look one way ganging up on somebody who looks a different way, you really have to, understand that, yeah, your motivations might be questioned, and you really need to think about the decisions you're making deeply before you actually make them. So let's talk about just the lead up. I mean, I think, we can all agree that Kairos, very successful, high profile, huge aspirations, was probably, not quite meeting them. Not to say it wouldn't have gotten there, but, you guys were definitely, setting a very high bar for a long time. So, what was going on with contracts you were being offered, and how did things play out that you ended up in June squeezed out of the company you founded?
Yeah. So if we go back and think about, just for the audience to get some some context, this is a company started at a dining room table, right? And Juan Pablo,
by two diverse founders.
In San Francisco before he had even moved to Miami. I probably wouldn't meet Juan Pablo for another kind of 6 months to a year, right?
Right.
After that. And so this is funded from, my own pocket, from some of the proceeds of having worked at Apple. And so from that kind of very humble beginning, the company ultimately processed over 1 billion human faces. It courted had customers like Walmart, Royal Caribbean, Walt Disney, Fox, NBC, huge kinds of customers and contracts. And for those that don't know, AI companies, you've got to just, whatever you do, you've got to do a lot of that first so that the AI gets really good before you can sell it for a lot more. So there's a number of years where you're just either making very little or zero in AI just to get the model kind of we call tires on the tread on the tires, right?
Is that because of it's sort of AI is so dependent on the big data sets,
Correct.
and you just really need to get the big data sets? And that's part of the issue with facial recognition, that the data sets, we can debate why, but don't include enough minorities. And so AI is not as good for minorities.
Yeah, it can be up to 30% off just on white women, just literally 30% less accurate. And then
you're right. You just
fall off from there.
fall off. Right. 30% is your baseline loss. Yeah.
So what we call pale male is the very best. It works very well with that group. And every dimension
Yeah. Do you think that, I mean, pale male cassettes who probably developed the software?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
That's your point, right? Yeah.
What do? So you're training an algorithm. You take a picture of yourself, you put it in there, and
right. Yeah.
It goes from there. And, you're two friends, and they're the same, and boom, boom. So came a long way. And along the way, realized, to Juan Pablo's point, that, hey, I'm the only Black CEO of a facial recognition firm.
That's so fucked
in the
up.
U.S., if not in the
That's
world.
so fucked up.
Right?
I mean, I'm sure it's true, but it's so fucked up.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And so if we don't fix the problem with bias in algorithms, who's going to fix it? Like, if the Black guy doesn't fix it, no it's going to.
Right. And there's a problem that a lot, most AI is closed AI. So you don't even actually know how the algorithms are coming, over time. You sort of, the algorithm goes and analyzes the data set. So you don't actually know how it's coming to its conclusions.
No.
And so it's even more important to have somebody at the top who's sensitive to the issues, because, with all due, look, if the world were all Hispanic, I wouldn't, if I were the pale male, I just wouldn't be as, as aware of these issues as you are.
Yeah, exactly correct. And so that actually, in my mind, became our strength. We were really world leaders I've testified at Congress, the whole nine, on this issue and this topic, TechCrunch, all the things. And so along this journey, the value of the company continues to go up and up. We loved more and more financial results, but even still, when you're in this time right now, we think about an Amazon, right? A Google, a Microsoft, when you're trying to say, we're doing the most ethical facial recognition and you don't want trouble, what do? You would have went and bought Kairos and their charismatic Black CEO, brought him into the company, and he would have been in charge of your spokesperson, and he could have run cover for you at Congress, right?
Right.
And what's a couple $100 million or whatever?
Like, couple $100 million, yeah. Dude. You're still selling yourself for too little.
What's $1 billion to Amazon?
No, of course,
for that situation, right? This is how it's done. So I teach my companies all the time. Sometimes it's just being alive long enough, right, for the world to come around to what you believe, right? So at the first check, do we believe the same thing? Do I believe what you're saying? Do I believe what your beliefs? And if I do, like Juan Pablo believed in me, then whatever happens from there, I know the world will come around to what we believe together, right?
Yeah.
This is Juan Pablo and the other gentleman's kind of early belief, and all of our investors along the way. What happens is, and you do different rounds of funding, and it's what we call Series A, right? The New World Angels show up, not as diverse, not as I don't know about how much core beliefs they kind of have in these areas, particularly diversity amongst
members.
AI is not. You're not going to see diversity amongst AI being a core belief of a group that's not diverse. It's just, where would it come from? Where would that feeling come from? So when they don't see what they want to see, one, they get annoyed, and then two, you have other people that will try to use the kind of Black founder narrative, like that guy's Black, he's probably doing bad things, he's just stealing stuff. Meanwhile, I've put in hundreds of thousands of dollars into the company, right. But you try to paint the Black founder poorly so that you can then kind of take over and do whatever you think is right. Your beliefs with the company ultimately, which is not panned out.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, you and I have always been in touch, but not, on a super regular basis, right? we sort of check in with each other every 4 or 5 months. If there's anything to, talk about. So I wasn't, I have a portfolio of 30 angel investments at the time. And, very, sort of happy with the, curve of Kairos. Sometimes feeling, okay, Brian's over promising, under delivering a little bit. And, knowing that's just the way the, game gets played. And, my big problem was it's easy to squeeze somebody out. It's what do you do the next day?
That's right. That's right.
No commercial strategy, no plan for the next day. And for me, it was, what was really troubling was 3 things were really troubling. One, that somebody I cared about was being squeezed out for reasons that, if those were the actual reasons, the reasons that were given, made absolutely no sense. Because I, as an investor, all I would say is, I don't give a crap about any of that. We're talking $5,000, $10,000, nothing. I mean, it just seems like, you just want an excuse to get somebody out. It's like, let me go through, 5 years of somebody's expense accounts or 5 years of, of founder spending. And believe me, I mean, if that's the best they can find, I mean, I quite honestly, maybe they aren't digging hard enough. So, the reasons given to me made no sense to justify a dismissal. Secondly, I didn't hear any plan about what would happen the next day. And sure enough, all that happened since that day was the company spiraled down, and predictably the people who took you out have taken control of the company 100%.
Yep.
And then 3, I've been shocked and embarrassed that people in Miami haven't asked any better questions about what happened. Again, instead of leaning in and looking in as a community, we've turned our gaze and just said, well, I think there's, if there's smoke, there's fire. There must be 2 different sides to that story, and just, sort of, shake your heads and put your head back down in your smartphone, and not really ask, how is it that the, one of the very, very few Black founders in Miami, and I'm not aware of another Black founder of in a space as important as facial recognition, gets squeezed out of his company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you recall the timing, Nancy Dahlberg, who has done some good work, was just being kind of moved out of her own situation, right?
Right.
Yeah. She since wrote some pieces and things that were better for Refresh Miami, but I don't believe she was there yet. She was kind of in between.
Right, in that transition.
Exactly. And her replacement, I don't even read the thing anymore. Rob, wow. I mean, he's like, he could care less about those kinds of things. And then, no one else from anywhere else, to be honest.
People need to think about that. I mean, that's just, I've been tweeting about it, just saying, guys and gals, we got to, with everything going on in the world, we got to think about, what's happened here in our community, and, how can we do better?
There have been some good individual people like yourself, Savina. Her. I think she worked with you guys at Patagon.
Oh, Matt Moschini. Oh, yeah. No, she's absolutely amazing.
Like rah, burned up, like on fire. Matt Hagman was very supportive. No surprise, he's just a good human. So there were individual folks. A lot of the investors actually were the ones that were most.
Well, the first thing I did, imagine your angel investors, the people who had been there the longest, waited the longest, put in the most risky money. We wrote a letter to the board, within a very short period of time, expressing those 3 concerns that I mentioned earlier. If those are the reasons, you're joking. We as the investors could care less. 2, what's the plan for tomorrow? It seems like the predictable end result is this: the people who squeeze Brian out are going to end up with complete control of the company for nothing. It hasn't been nothing, but I believe that's been the result.
Mm-hmm.
And aren't there concerns about the optics of what's just happened?
Yeah, the Black founder. This is true in our work as investors. Oftentimes, the white founder is seen as indispensable. Mark Zuckerberg has to be the CEO.
Right.
Crazy voting rights. Travis Kalanick has to be the CEO of Uber,
Right.
no matter what, right? You look at,
and so their shares vote 5 times a regular share, or 10 times a regular share.
Yep, got to look out for those guys. The black founder is seen as lucky, right? Oh, Kairos is an obvious thing. Facial recognition. I could just take anybody off the street and just run a facial recognition AI firm.
Right.
I mean, the idea that, I mean, a little, this is kind of a non-modest, but I think it's okay, right? If I made it look easy, don't think it was easy. Right?
Oh, dude, I never believe. Dude, I was here on day one. I know how hard it was. Month number 6, let alone month number 600 or 60. I mean, yeah,
exactly. You can't just swap that out and think that anybody I put there is going to be fine. And then to your point, your second point, what's the plan, right? And there's no plan.
Yeah, no, and I mean, for full disclosure, my firm has represented you in certain fallout from that situation. I haven't been involved at all in that because I'm not a litigator. I'm a lover, not a fighter. We have people who do that, but so I haven't been involved. But that is a disclosure because I'm not 100% impartial as an investor. And then my firm having represented you. It's so.
No, though Juan Pablo's words are not for sale.
No, I'm 100% my own thinker, and I don't mind saying publicly what I'm just an open book, and if anyone from New World or involved in that situation wants to come onto the podcast, they're more than invited anytime. So let's talk about what we can do better. I think the Kairos story is a real cautionary tale, regardless of, how one interprets what went on, even if, you give the most charitable interpretation of what happened to New World and by the investor, because I'm not sure it's really the institution, but, the people there, even if let's just be super charitable. I think there is a lot we can learn, but more importantly, what should we do? What can I, and this is something, Michelle Abbs, who's very passionate about, female entrepreneurship and she has this concept of male allies, which I'm always a little uncomfortable because I'm like, fucking women are strong. They don't need me as an ally. They just need me to not fuck things up for them, not get in the way, Yeah. So it's a little bit, but I respect her and love her and appreciate that. But yeah, I really actually wanted to get on, not to just, touch base with you, but also to hear, what can I do? What should I be doing? What can somebody like me do who doesn't have a lot of money, but has a lot of enthusiasm? What can somebody like me do who has some money and some time? And what can somebody do who can, maybe write a bigger check than I can write, a 7-figure check, an 8-figure check? What should they be doing? I mean, there's obviously a lot of hurt and anger and issues that need to get addressed, being talked about, in the street and in the boardroom. But what can we do other than give the thumbs up or you know what I mean, or fucking turn off Fox News? What can we do?
Well, that would go a long way. But if we're think about real concrete things, I've got some kind of abstract answers, but I think
But then give us some things, because I like targets. I don't like quotas, but I like targets. I like KPIs. I like KPIs.
KPIs. So a great KPI, and again, I think Juan Pablo lives this every day. He throws in the pre-COVID time. He would throw dinners and lunches actually at Novo Centro down in Brickell with a topic that's important to either kind of investors or the startup entrepreneur ecosystem. Right. And whether he's doing it on purpose or whether it's just his network, this is the first group in that room consistently. And people need to see in like the kind of important lunches and the important dinners.
That's so important. Yeah, that's so
They need to see people of color across the table.
Yeah.
And you need to be talking to them, chatting with them. I can hold my own in the room. I think
just the opposite. Yeah, no. I'm always like, yeah, no, that's and it's interesting. It's not from. I mean, I'll be honest. It's not pandering at. It's not like I sit there. Okay, do I have enough? People to cut. But for me, that's how you get the best conversations, right? I mean, it's funny. I like listening to this guy, Sam Harris, who's a bit of some people find, a bit of a controversial podcaster. But the problem Sam has with a bunch of his guests, he brings people on that he agrees with, or he brings somebody on he's just going to fight with, right? So, but it's like, no, man, what I like is, when, I start realize like this issue around facial recognition, where, dude, I still remember you stopped me in my fucking tracks, and that was 7-8 years ago. But that comment, because you were sensitive, because of your cultural background and because of who you are and what you've had to face in your life in a way that I haven't had to face, you changed, you opened my eyes. And yeah, so when I bring people together, I want there to be just a little I don't want people fighting. I'm not going to bring the Trump supporter, and you know what I mean? Like I have some limits. Like we don't need, like, I'm not trying to solve the world's problem, but I am trying to, just tweak things enough that there's a better conversation. Let's put that. So that's a great point.
Yeah, oftentimes these are investors, lawyers that kind of, well, and I don't even like the idea, but kind of like the kind of cream of the crop of the
right
here. And yet it's diverse and almost always about 30-40% women.
Oh yeah.
And
for sure. No, and I always actually try to, it depends what the topic is, but I always, have, some are more investor focused, more entrepreneur, but I always have investors and entrepreneur, because I think you gotta mix it up and expose people. And it is interesting because I do get sometimes people a little, like, oh, I wasn't invited to the last one. And I'm like, of course not. I got to mix it up, because if it's always, the whole idea is I want you to meet, Javier Villamizar from SoftBank, et cetera. But once you guys have met, the next time maybe I don't invite you or I don't invite him, because I want, whoever, is a new important, angel investor, potential angel investor in town to, meet a new sort of group of people.
So that's for your answer of kind of, let's say, I'm rich, but I could, like, anyone can throw a dinner. Anybody can
right.
have a house, right? And if you're eat with someone else.
Yeah.
The table stakes are low. Now for the person that does have some means, there's a saying going around on Twitter now. It's just like hire or wire, right? Like that's like Black founders and women, underrepresented founders in general, are actually over mentored. They don't need any more sit downs. They don't need it.
Yeah. That's so good. Please talk to us, explain to us. Yeah. What do Black founders, women founders, what do they need? That's such a good point that, sort of offering to find the closest, brown person and invite them out to lunch. Maybe that's pandering. Maybe that isn't welcome.
It's not helpful, and it's dilutive of their time, right? So you're robbing them of their most important resource. If we're at a certain point anyway, which many of these companies are, they've already met Juan Pablo years ago, right? They've already known, they already right? Alejo. Like, if I have a question, I'll ask. Like, I had a question once about one of our early investors, Marco, is a brilliant in the world of events. Like, I mean, no one knows more about events than Marco Ghiberti. No one. And so we were looking at doing a conference. So I called him, and he gave me great counsel. I don't need someone else who never met me before, doesn't know the business, whatever, to sit me down and teach me about events, or you with law, or like.
Yeah, no, I see exactly what you mean. So your point is some well-intentioned people, that they don't realize that that's not what founders need. That you'll go out, and when you need some advice on something specific, and that's what I always felt with you. I mean, socially, we'd see each other and you'd come to the lunches. But when I remember when you did your crypto offering, or we sat down and chatted about that, because that was like a specific thing. But that was you reaching out to me. Yeah, that's very helpful. What are the other? So what do founders of color need in terms of support, or is it just money? What is it?
So connections is really much more important. So I was talking to Lala Maydon from the former head of Endeavor Miami recently, and she's part of a Harvard group in Miami.
Right.
She wouldn't mind me saying. She came to me saying, "Hey, as a group, we got together. There aren't many Black people in the group, but they still were like, we need to help Black people, right? And not brown or this or that, like Black.
Right. No, but that's. I mean, look, it's funny. I'm not sure how I would have felt about that 10 years ago, but as I've seen venture capital get stuck and society get stuck where it was, I do not believe we've made meaningful progress in 10 years. And so it's almost that, the same way I said I don't like quotas, but I like KPIs. I sort of felt like we were on a trend. Of course, I wanted the trend line to go faster, but we were on a, trend up. Now I've just realized, no, if anything, especially the last few years, we've been on a trend down. And starting from and so that's where it's like, no, I'm back to, what, we need to make this a priority. And, I'm happy to hear, investing group like Harvard or alumni associations are actually saying what needs to be said.
Yeah.
Let's help Black, because again, in Miami, Hispanic, I don't think we need any particular attention.
Yeah,
obviously there's social economic groups within Miami, white, Black, Hispanic, et cetera, that need all sorts of support. But I'm just saying as a racial group.
Yeah, in the same way that Jamaicans are the majority group in Jamaica.
Right, exactly. And it doesn't mean poor Jamaicans in Jamaica don't need help.
Exactly. Exactly. Same exact.
Yeah. And so, what do you think the alumni associations or, the Duke has a angel investing group. What should they, concretely be trying to do? I mean, obviously one thing to do, which obviously some institutions are doing, is, give capital and become LPs, investors in funds like Lightship Cappello.
Well done.
I don't know why that suddenly didn't roll off my tongue. But what else can they do?
So yeah, I'm going to echo that. Invest in Black funds, particularly funds that are focused on underrepresented entrepreneurs.
Right.
That money's going to go 1-to-1 right to where you want it.
But what do you think about like SoftBank's initiative? And, you've seen a few mega funds sort of taking, a small bit of the capital. I mean, is there a word like blackwashing? I mean, do you think that's meaningful? I mean, without not talking about SoftBank in particular, because I'm sure it's super well intentioned and the timing was amazing. But do you think that's good use of that capital? Do you sort of roll your eyes? I mean, what's your sort of sense in terms of is that like seeding a sort of movement that needs some priming of the pump? How do you view those kinds of things?
Let's just use the SoftBank example specifically because I think this is a good one that's instructive for everybody.
Right.
I've got a call with them coming up next week, and we're excited about seeing where we can partner in any regard. If it's just investing, whatever. But so the SoftBank fund, $100 million, focus on this community. What happens is you're like, okay, I want to help the Black community. What do? I go to Google. Who can help me? Oh, this guy, Paul Judge from Atlanta, he seems like he does some things in this area. Let me reach out to him, right? Meanwhile, like, there's a bunch of us in Miami, like.
Right. So it is that, think global, act local, right? Your point is right. I mean, and here's a question I think, again, as somebody who hasn't been as involved or quite honestly interested in these issues the way I realized I should have been, because again, it was an inconvenient truth to me, that we weren't making the kind of progress, that the trend line wasn't, going to just be such that these issues would resolve themselves. Right. I mean, as you said, your fund is not looking to take lower returns because of its investment thesis. You're going for market returns. And given that in venture, the returns suck, market returns should be easy to achieve. And I'm sure you'll, do incredibly well because of your investment thesis. But is it hard to find Black founders and Black led companies that, you really want to invest in?
Yeah,
I'm setting up a nice, easy question for you. Just so you know, I know the answer for everyone who thinks. And is it hard to find great GPs who happen to be Black?
It is not.
Oh,
it is not.
Guess what? I hate to tell you, for an embarrassing large percentage of people listening, that the answer wasn't so obvious.
Which is it's so hard for me to understand.
I know.
I often say, in fact, I said this in a meeting with a potential LP the other day. I'm fishing in a pond stocked full of trout. Just like they're jumping out of the pond into the boat. Like there's no way for them in the boat. Everyone else is fishing across the street for these 5 fish. There's 40 anglers, there's 100 anglers.
Right.
Trying to get this 5 fish that are in there. Right? Just turn around. Just turn around. I'm right here. Like that's just
I mean, I don't want to get sidetracked in any discussion of affirmative action, other than to make just one point that has always stuck out to me. I do think affirmative action, unfortunately, has had the counterproductive effect that it makes some white people feel that Blacks and Hispanics and people who've allegedly benefited somehow have it easier, where they don't realize it is exponentially harder in most of this world to be Black and much more difficult in much of America to be Hispanic. And, that is, and so going to your point, hey, for Black founders and founders of color, and even and I wish we had a way to honestly measure, because what I'm really actually most interested beyond the color of anyone's skin is, where do they come from? What kind of challenges have they had to face? Because I've had certain challenges, but so it's not difficult socioeconomic challenges. I actually wish we could measure in an honest way, how poor somebody was raised and how much opportunities they were exposed to or weren't exposed to. And, there's obviously, disproportionate challenges in the Black community and even in the Latin community in this country. And, that's actually the challenge. But your point is that those people actually are being overlooked in terms of investment, et cetera. And so, as you say, the river's stocked with trout.
By the time they get to me, they're all unicorns. Having run the gauntlet to the point of that you're even in my office,
right?
Talking about 100K MRR or whatever, you're already a unicorn. It's just arguing thesis or not. It's kind of that simple. And then can I verify the story is what I'm doing. I'm not, the result is the result. You're here, right?
Right.
And the other challenge, and I've said this, and I'm actually going to say this also to SoftBank on next week. When you're talking to a fund like ours, there's no one else coming. There's no meeting, there's no next meeting where the other Black VC fund for the Midwest and South is going to show up, right?
Right.
This is it. So
no, right. And so, your point is, right. Yeah.
Yeah, those founders.
Right. What you're saying, as you say it, it's like it's crystallizing something I had not even thought about. You're right that somebody who's a successful, who has a company, the same KPI, they're in San Antonio Road. They meet with SoftBank, then they meet, with Sequoia, then they meet, with Insight, then they meet with Technology Crossover, and they just can keep meeting and the valuation going up and setting their terms. And if you're Zuckerberg, a young Zuckerberg or a young Travis from Uber, you can start saying, hey, I want my shares to vote, 5x what a regular share votes. And your point is, if you're a Black founder, a minority founder, talking with you, It's like, hey, you want some color on your cap table or not?
You're bored. And look at my story. This is where the story helps, right? Look at my story and know that I understand and I'm going to be there for you because I've lived through it on the other side, right? You need me on your board. You want me on your cap table.
Right.
Right.
That's so powerful.
And I'll give another example of a real person. So when I was at Kairos, very kind of popular, I would always help founders almost in the same way I do now. A gentleman named Delane Parnell, he would come down to Miami to talk to early, seed investors. Didn't have much money at the time. I literally gave him a key to my house. He slept in the back bedroom. I would come home and he would just be there. Got from Detroit. He would just because he would just work the streets in different cities. And I was his Miami contact. Delane went on to start a company called Play Versus. That company is now worth $1.6 billion, right? It's the guy still on my couch. If I was an investor then, I would have given the $250,000. My $100,000 investment then would be worth about $99 million now.
Oh.
Fishing, it's just
right.
I'm already part of that community. Other folks aren't. It's simple as that.
Right. No, and I guess to just circle back where we started. Where you talked about the demographic map, the census map, ignores those little micro communities. And right, the reality is, that micro community of people with real credibility who are Black in the tech world. That's a micro community, and it's a community, through people like you, we can tap into.
There you go.
Brian, I love you, man. This was a conversation. I feel like I'm sure I did a terrible job at, putting the real issues on the table, but, just know I'm always trying to be, if not part of the solution, at least not part of the problem. So, dude, I love you.
Love you
and
too.
I can't wait to collaborate with you for the next 10, 15, 20 years.
We're going to do it.
As long as you got it in it.
We're going to do it.
Take care, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
Este fue otro programa de Aquí y Ahora, auspiciado por PAG.law, especialista en Venture Capital. Hasta pronto.